If this to be the end, farewell, cried the wounded piper boy. Whilst the muskets cracked and the yeomen roared hurrah and the ramparts fell. Methinks me breathes me last, me fears, said he. Holy shit, you've got him!
I have to say, The Grand Budapest Hotel is definitely one of the most well-rounded movies I've ever seen. Everything from Wes Anderson's iconic directing style to the score to its cinematography, everything in this movie just feels so unique. This probably comes from the fact that the film has to create a culture for the fictional country of Dubrovka to act as a background for the main story. But how exactly does he do this? Well, let's go through it step by step. To start, The Grand Budapest Hotel is a multi-layered narrative. The story itself is about hotel concierge Gustav H. and his lobby boy Zero Mustafa. Gustav H. greatly values his profession, fine art, beautiful poetry.
While questing once in noble wood of grey medieval pine, I came upon a tomb.
And older women.
She was dynamite in the sack, by the way.
She was 84.
I've had older.
One of his lovers, Madame D, suddenly dies, and Gustav H. is named heir to the world-famous painting Boy with Apple. When Dmitri, a family member, doesn't allow Gustav to take the painting, Gustav steals it and subsequently is hunted by Dmitri's mercenaries and the law, respectively. It's a grand, fantastical adventure, just like something out of a kid's storybook. Well, that's because it is.
She's been murdered, and you think I did it.
The film shows scenes from present day, 1985, 1968, and 1932, respectively. The way this works is that the main plot of the story is described by an older Zero Mustafa to a writer in 1968. From there, the writer writes a book called The Grand Budapest Hotel, and it becomes a world-famous story. The present-day shots show an admirer of that story. These scenes go from present to past in a narrative sense to slowly reveal the true story featured in the film. This presentation feels very similar to opening up a book and flipping through the pages and diving deeper into a story, something that Wes Anderson is very talented at doing. There's also an evident technical difference between the time periods as well. The film starts in 16:9 aspect ratio in order to show modern-day cinematography style. It then changes to older aspect ratios as the film goes back in time, culminating with a 4:3 aspect ratio to show non-verbally that it is an older time period. It's an effective visual cue that only further makes the film's presentation of the time periods feel more story-like. Speaking of which, after the author begins narrating the story, the film introduces a chapter system. This makes the story of Gustav H. feel even more like a storybook. The aspect ratio isn't the sole changing technical factor with the time skips. The film also progressively changes its grading of. And now for a good majority of this video and why I love this movie so much. I think the use of color in this film is remarkable. I find it so interesting how the color changes from time period to time period. To begin, the present-day colors are presented as muted and realistic for the most part. The introduction of the Budapest book is the first visual with the popping colors you see throughout the rest of the film. The pink fully foreshadows the main coloring of the rest of the movie. As you jump back to 1985 and eventually 1968, this presents a charming view of what is being shown in the past. The vibrancy of the colors presented slowly rises as we go back in time, somewhat showing the more classical view of film in the older days. However, the colors drastically change as we jump back to 1932. Every color is extremely bright and vibrant. The movie has a specific palette it follows, featuring mainly purples and pinks. I believe these colors are heightened extremely in order to meet the fantastical descriptions given by Zero Mustafa. I think Wes tries to capture this exactly. Are the colors realistic? Hell no. But the look of this time period is based in memory, and the colors of the setting will be heightened and exaggerated with time. Wes Anderson is trying to show what Zero Mustafa remembers and how the writer presents it. The color shown in the 1932 section also greatly represents the time period in film history as well. The bright color palette seems to call upon the introduction of color to mostly black and white films of that era. Back in that time period, classical Hollywood films mainly were black and white. However, with the introduction of Technicolor, everything changed. To compensate for the lack of color featured in Hollywood film, producers and cinematographers alike would add a shit ton of color to their movies to show what Technicolor was capable of. Think of Wizard of Oz, for example. That film literally shows this Technicolor transformation midway through the film itself. It goes from black and white, just like classical Hollywood film, to literally every single color imaginable. This film opened the door for Technicolor and changed everything for film going forward. Interesting fact, this time period in the Grand Budapest Hotel is set in 1932, the same year that Technicolor was introduced to film. That's pretty cool. Well, it's impossible to talk about Wes Anderson without referencing his highly stylized work. At this point in history, I think it's pretty fair to say that the guy has basically invented his own film genre. A quick rundown for those who don't know a ton about Wes Anderson and his previous works: he has a very particular subjective style of film presentation. For instance, you're definitely going to see a ton of symmetrical shots found in his films, and you'll also get a ton of deadpan deliveries from the cast.
You're looking so well, darling, you really are. I don't know what sort of cream they've put on you down at the morgue, but I want some.
However, what does Wes's subjective style add to this storybook feeling? Well, for starters, he went all out in order to make this world completely believable. For instance, the score was developed to sound like folk music found in the country of Dubrovka, a fictional country. Folk music for a fictional country. Listen to this. Gorgeous. Through production design, he helped create currency for this country, as well as newspapers, train tickets, trains, different hotels, different lobby boys, different clothing, different baked goods, and just everything. And every aspect of the production design just leads towards more feelings of storybook storytelling. One of my favorite subjective choices Wes made for this film is the iris effect. You can find it throughout the film. There's quite a bit of shots in this film that show a new character being introduced with a significant level of importance, but we may not know a ton about them just yet. However, the way Wes shows that this character is important is by showing an iris focus move, where you can see the light focus on one portion of the character. This feels insanely old school and feels accurate to the time period.
I go to bed with all my friends.
Nevertheless, the overall camera movement is highly subjective as well. There are countless tracking shots found throughout the film that feel unnatural to the human eye. This places the setting and background firmly in the background and places an extra level of focus on the characters we watch. This is a trademark from Wes Anderson. You can also find a ton of shots in the film where the characters are framed in the center of the frame, similar to what you would find on the page of, you guessed it, a storybook. Overall though, Wes Anderson just really knocked it out of the park with this film. He went above and beyond with his team to create an insanely believable world. He used this remarkable and fantastical production design to create a backdrop for this story within a story within a story. This is a movie that would have been presented very, very differently if another director were to write and direct it. And only Wes Anderson's subjective point of view could transform the storybook to screen so well.
Why do you want to be a lobby boy?
Who wouldn't? At the Grand Budapest, sir.